Joe Rogan needs to be challenged, but not canceled. I say this as a fan who's listened to him for years. He does need to be challenged from time to time because he lets a lot of really bad ideas fly on his show, especially when it involves space aliens. And I mean, after all, he did question the 1969 moon landing. I mean, come on. But with all the controversy regarding his anti-vaccine stance on COVID and other musicians on Spotify like Neil Young and Joni Mitchell stating that it's either them or Joe Rogan, essentially trying to get Joe Rogan canceled on Spotify, and now another musician, India Ari, also pulling her music from Spotify over Joe Rogan saying the N-word at times, I do not agree with having Joe Rogan canceled at all. Not that Joe Rogan needs another rube on YouTube like me to come to his defense, but as someone who is all too concerned with free speech in our country, especially coming from a family that escaped a murderous communist regime in Cuba, yeah, I'd like to weigh in on this issue too. Like I said, Joe Rogan needs to be challenged on a lot of nonsense that he's let fly on his show for years. And that's the thing. Many people, especially other comedians and celebrities, seem to be intimidated by Joe Rogan, and therefore they very respectfully refrain from challenging him on certain issues. And I don't think that it's simply because Joe Rogan's a black belt in jiu-jitsu and he can knock out most people with either a spinning back kick or a rear naked chokehold. I think it's that since he's got one of the biggest podcasts going, averaging millions of views on a daily basis, a lot of people want to be on his show. They want to be on his good side. And I get it. I'd love to be on his show promoting my art that I have for sale, like this post-it note drawing I did of him, which is part of a 2020 daily drawing challenge that I turned into a post-it note mosaic that is for sale for anyone interested. Contact me through the links down below. But with that said, I'd like to think that if I was on his show and he said something I didn't agree with or that I knew was utter bullshit, that I'd push back a little. Especially when he gets into talking about ayahuasca and how that could somehow connect people with their souls that travel to Orion and meet up with space aliens or whatever other nonsense that best-selling author Graham Hancock was talking about on his show. But I don't want to get sidetracked by that. But there's other more serious issues that affect us all that I was dismayed to see Joe Rogan not be challenged or let alone challenge his guests, like when he had Bernie Sanders on his show and Joe didn't push back against Bernie's bullshit about socialism working if we did it just right. And yet, Joe Rogan definitely pushed back against Candace Owens when it came to climate change. But I think he did that because despite her being a black female, and most people don't want to challenge black females nowadays, like with what's happened with Whoopi Goldberg. Just watch Stephen Colbert and you could see he's almost shaking in his pants about how to address the issue with her comments about the Holocaust not being racist. I think conservative, especially outspoken conservative commentators like Candace Owens, she loses her black female privilege, basically, to be challenged because she's conservative. And it's totally okay to just backlash conservatives. And I wonder to what extent Joe Rogan himself, despite all his FU money, he just doesn't want to fall into the bad graces of the majority of people who are left of center, like what's apparently happened. Now, I'm just speculating, so challenge this claim of mine in the comments down below, but I'm assuming Joe Rogan knows his demographics pretty well, hence the reason why Spotify signed him on for $100 million. And I'm assuming Joe Rogan knows most of his right-of-center fans are probably a lock. He doesn't have to worry about losing those people. And if he loses too many of them, he'll bring on Jordan Peterson to talk in very roundabout ways about the existence of God and other religious gobbledygook that Jordan Peterson himself needs to be challenged on as well. But I digress. And by the way, I know Joe Rogan is a comedian, not a journalist. But trying to have it both ways gets you into controversies like this. And that's the other thing I've noticed about Joe's show. For a comedian, he's not always that funny. And I say this as someone who saw him live back in 2018, I believe, at the Jackie Gleason Theater, and I was laughing my ass off to the point of tears. However, Joe takes on this let's get to the bottom of the issue attitude at times, which is one of the reasons why I love his show. But at the same time, you can't then later be like, well, I'm just a dummy talking about stuff and asking questions. But hey, who am I to tell Joe Rogan how to run his $100 million show? I barely have 25 subscribers on YouTube. So what do I know? Yet, That's why I suspect that Joe Rogan doesn't want to piss off too many left-of-center people, because the majority of entertainment media is run by people who are mostly liberal left-of-center types. And that's no conspiracy theory. It's actually very natural. The type of people who like to be creative, expressive, and inquisitive, like myself, they're bound to be liberal by nature. They're also bound to be idealistic and open-minded and empathetic, etc. But apparently there is a shift in the cosmic zeitgeist. And by the way, I just made up that term, so don't take it too seriously. But yes, there is something going on now, especially after the 1990s and particularly after Obama's presidency, where most self-proclaimed liberals are not behaving so liberal. I wish I had come up with the term the illiberal left, but that is a thing, that even those who have been pushing cancel culture, like Whoopi Goldberg, are getting a taste of their own medicine. So coming back to Neil Young and India Ari pulling their music from Spotify, this is where most left-of-center quote-unquote progressive types are doing themselves a disservice by wanting to cancel Joe Rogan instead of challenging him. In the case of Neil Young, an artist whose music I've loved, I'm extremely disappointed by his ultimatum. So much so, I don't think I could ever listen to my favorite song of his, Cinnamon Girl, the same way ever again. And what specifically did Joe Rogan say that Neil Young is claiming has cost people's lives? What? Did Neil Young not listen to the hours-long interview between Joe Rogan and CNN's chief medical correspondent Sanjay Gupta, where Joe Rogan left no doubt about his taking doctor-prescribed drugs and all the misinformation that was being used against Joe, specifically by CNN to cancel him? Which, by the way, right now, CNN is imploding after all the massive controversies they've had. From Chris Cuomo trying to cover for his brother, former New York Governor Andrew Cuomo, and the hundreds of nursing home COVID deaths that he's almost directly responsible for. And now the latest scandal with former CNN President Jeff Zucker stepping down after being exposed for having a relationship with a subordinate he was trying to promote. This is where I know I'm not saying anything new, but it bears worth repeating every chance and by as many people who are as interested in this as possible. This is why our country is becoming so polarized, and needlessly so. It's all over miscommunication that then becomes misinformation, and then that misinformation slowly morphs into deliberate disinformation, especially when it's being wielded by people who profit from the division. And as for India Ari being upset with Joe Rogan over his use of a supposedly racial slur that is never to be uttered by any white person under any context, but it's perfectly okay for black rappers to say it over and over again, even when it involves the killing of other black rappers, this is further confirmation that there are people who profit from social unrest and political divide. Because India Ari's quote about he shouldn't even be uttering the word, Ari said, "Don't even say it. Under any context. Don't say it. That's where I stand. I have always stood there." She's not the first person to say that. That's really coming from Al Sharpton, who made that declaration years ago on TV. And while I'll agree that the use of any racial slur or sexist or homophobic slurs should be frowned upon, and we should all do a lot better at being considerate, respectful, and even kind with one another, this idea that certain words can't be said under any context, especially by a certain group of people, depending on their skin color, this is detrimental to the health of any nation. Not to mention, it's kind of racist. This is right up there with not being able to draw the Prophet Muhammad, lest we want to end up with terrorist attacks, which I assure you, there will be enough people in the media that will excuse the attacks. And that's why race hustlers like Al Sharpton made that declaration about white people not being able to use the N-word under any context. It's not simply because of its ugly historical use against slaves and then a full century of systemic racism. No, I'm willing to bet it's because people like Al Sharpton have turned the civil rights movement into the civil rights industry. He makes money from shaking down wealthy celebrities and politicians whenever they say the wrong thing. Those public apologies and mea culpas are usually not for free. But I don't want to be sued for slander, libel, or defamation despite that I have a tiny channel on YouTube. And if I got anything factually incorrect, please let me know in the comments down below. And but if you like this video, please give it a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, and if you're interested in any of my art, either original or merchandising, please check out the links down below, and thanks for watching.